The World Free Zones Organization presents New World Model, The Future of Industry, featuring Johnny Taylor from the Society for Human Resource Management.
We have 310,000 members across the globe in 165 countries. Although we're based in the United States, it's a global organization. We study human resources, and we study human resources from the employer perspective as well as from the employee's perspective. And the pandemic has created an amazing opportunity for us to better understand the work, the worker, and the workplace.
What has changed most radically in workforce dynamics during this crisis?
We describe the workplace crisis as if it's sort of one-faceted, that it only has one facet. The reality is, especially in the United States, but I think it's true globally, we're dealing with a pandemic which has resulted in an economic slowdown, if not an absolute sort of halt. And then we're dealing with what naturally flows from that, and that is people and how they deal with it. And some of that is manifesting itself in disagreement amongst people, tension, frustration. And so all of that together has created a really uncomfortable environment for human beings around the globe. The thing, though, that stands out most is, at the end of the day, it's the uncertainty around people's health, as well as their uncertainty around their financial health. We oftentimes describe it here as life and your livelihood. What we're seeing is that people are really carrying that burden, and it's impacting how they show up to work, even for those people who have jobs, because we know as a result of the pandemic that, around the globe, people have been laid off and displaced. But what's affecting everyone, whether you have a job or you don't have a job, is this combination of intense pressure, and it's showing up in how you show up.
Which sectors have been the most affected?
There's little question that anything related to the travel industry, be it cruise ships, be it hotels, hospitality, at restaurants, anything that I kind of generally term, these are very discretionary spends. You can go on holiday or you cannot go on holiday. And in this current environment, the pandemic has literally prevented it. So it's not even if you have the money that you could participate. They're just not allowing it to occur because we're quarantined in various levels of quarantine around the world. I would say hospitality generally is, and travel and tourism related businesses are the ones that are most negatively impacted. But the wake effect of that, and we don't think about this, we think traditionally about workers. And when you think about the combined workforce, the people who are a part of the gig economy, they're not in formal jobs, but they are really impacted. If an employer hires 500 to 1,000 people in a community, and those people now begin working remotely, they're not coming in. And thus the people who served them food, the security personnel, the parking garage personnel, those ancillary industries or jobs that flow from the major employer, they are all being impacted. That's our biggest concern. And what we're seeing is it's not just impacting the worker on the job, but it's the wake effect of all of those individuals not working in the workplace.
In what region will the impact be most severe in the short term?
The populations who have the least resources, that is, who make the least amount of money, who live in poverty, who are food deprived, etc., that region, wherever it's located, again, the United States has very healthy and financially well regions, and then they also have poor, significantly poor, where poverty is the reality every day. Those parts of the world where those human beings are beset with poor financial resources, which naturally leads into poor access to health and education, those areas are really feeling the impact, not only in the short run, but especially in the short run. But over time, we're going to see that those regions around the world are going to be negatively impacted potentially for generations. And that's what's most disturbing about this, is the short-term answer is they're feeling the pressure of not having jobs, children not going to school, not being able to seek health care. But what that looks like 10, 20 years from now is really scary.
What is the greatest challenge for employers to overcome in the short term?
We as employers have to figure out during this period of time, one, how do we identify the people we need most and that means to get us through what is frankly a tough time when we can least afford to invest in people. How do we invest in them now? The easiest answer for an employer right now is our revenue shortfalls are occurring. We have limited resources to invest, so the temptation is to stop investing. What we know, and this is globally true, is that if you stop investing today, the impacts of that won't show up for another year or two. And so our short-term decisions are going to impact our long-term lives. For example, many organizations right now are reducing the amount of training and development budget spend because that's discretionary. You don't have to, I have a choice, pay people today, but I don't have to necessarily invest in their training. Well, those very people need to be training right now. If you're at home, not working or working remotely so you have extra time, this is the very time to solve for the skills gap that we employers knew we were experiencing before COVID. COVID won't make it any better. And so there's an opportunity here, a unique opportunity to upskill employees so that when we come out of the pandemic, the post-pandemic world, that we will have the human resources necessary to compete in what will likely be a global recession. And therefore, the investment in people, having the best people on board with the latest skills is going to be even more critical than pre-pandemic.
How should companies adapt to face this challenge?
There are various things that organizations can do, but I'm going to say something that might be a little controversial, but the number one thing that an organization can do right now, wherever one is on the globe right now, is to become very, very clear about their culture. Redefine. So first one has to visit, what is the culture of my organization? Why do we exist? And I'm talking bigger than the mission and the vision and the purpose statements, but at its core, why do we exist? And then how do we want to experience this existence is the second question. And that's what culture is all about. This is such a unique opportunity for organizations to stop, breathe, look around, talk with their current employees and say, what does it mean to work here? And then that organization has to decide, do we like that? Are we okay with that? Because at this point, when most of the globe has pushed the pause button, this is an opportunity to really reflect. You know, there's short-term tactical things like investing in your people, et cetera, but the most profound change for, I think, globally, every organization is to say, who do we want to be on the other side of this pandemic? And that's about culture. One has to identify what the culture is right now, and then ultimately decide what you aspire for it to be, and work on becoming really clear and intentional about culture coming out of this.
What new employment models are likely to emerge in the medium to long term?
We were already beginning to see the global sort of combined workforce change, how we historically, and I can speak specifically to the United States and to some degree India as well, where we have a significant presence from an employer perspective. We were moving toward a more of a combined worldview of worker. Worker wasn't just people in the formal economy, because increasingly companies were relying on supplementing and in some places outright replacing their traditional employee base with people who were more contingent workers, some in the gig economy, many on just contracts. We were moving slowly toward, away from the traditional employee for life model. And so the mix now is increasingly going to be, as employers think about it, almost just-in-time employment. So I'm not going to have 500 employees at one time. I'll have 200 base, and then who are just my steadies. And then as I need them, I'll draw down on those resources. As we think about in the medium term, the impact of this is the entire mix of any particular employee's workforce. And I'm talking about, again, a combined workforce, globally thinking about people who are our full-time workforce and people who supplement our workforce And supplement might be 9 months, it might be a year or 2 years. The point is that we're going to look more globally and comprehensively at our worker population, be they gig workers or be they full-time traditional employees. They are all our workforces, and we're going to think about talent very differently going forward.
What new opportunities will this create for employers and employees?
Employers have the opportunity now to redefine how they think about the employer-employee relationship. What is an employee? Is it a traditional person who remains with us for 30 years or 20 years and receives benefits from us, et cetera, works in our workspace, which is very different? They have an opportunity now. And that's what really good organizations are doing right now, is they're prepared to make monumental change, not the incremental change that would have likely been our course if it weren't for a pandemic. So this situation has literally given us license to rethink the entire way that on the employee side, I think that the opportunity here is to really understand your value to an organization. Employees oftentimes, and I've heard this and our research bears this out at SHRM, what we hear is they say, I have a job. I'm not necessarily sure that I understand how my job ties into the overall well-being of this organization. From a skills perspective, and that's why we have a skills gap, a lot of people don't realize the importance of their job, no matter where they are in the organization. At the lowest levels, from a hierarchical standpoint, to the most senior levels, we find that people just don't understand their value to the organization. What skill do they bring that makes them uniquely an asset to the organization? This is an opportunity for us to reflect on that and to commit to lifelong learning. No longer can you come into an organization, do what you do over and over and over, year in, year out, and then retire at some point. You have got to change with the way the world changes, which is a lot. So the two of us have an opportunity now to revisit as an employer how we think about workers, and workers have an opportunity to think about how they deliver and how they add value to an organization. Now, when you tie all of that in, what it's going to result in is a seismic sort of sea change around culture. Organizations will see themselves differently, employees will see themselves differently, and the social contract, not legal, but the social contract between employee and employer will forever change after COVID. And this is a global reality, not limited to any particular part of the country. Culture is going to be redefined in a way that none of us have seen in a century. Think about what the outcome of this all will be. I think about it in terms of cultural alignment. We don't hear, at least in the States, the term fit, and I know we've talked about it a lot. It's a loaded term because it almost sometimes is the opposite of diversity and inclusion, because when you say someone doesn't fit, oftentimes that's code for they don't look like me, they don't have the same experiences, etc. So it's not about fitness anymore, but about alignment. The organization and the employee have to both ask themselves, are we aligned? As how the corporation wants its employees to show up and to add value, the employee says, and do I want to do it that way? So it's not just, am I qualified to do the job? Am I the smartest person? Am I the most? The question is there alignment on how we see the world and how we see the world of work? And if it isn't, you can't work here. You don't want to, as an employee, work here, and the employer doesn't want you to work there. The real change that we're seeing, the transformation, is a focus on cultural alignment, but from both sides. It's not that the employer is just changing the way it does it. The employee, if you truly understand your value, can say, oh, and I don't want to work there either. I can take who I am and all of my skills to another employer, and that employer is more culturally aligned with who I am. That is going to be the biggest transformation we see over the medium to long term out of this pandemic.
How will these changes transform the global value chain?
Normally, the cycle is such that when one continent or one part of the world is doing well, the other part of the world isn't. And so rarely have we had a situation where the entire world has frozen and is being impacted by something, and it's the same something. So as we now sit back, we have a unique opportunity, probably once in a lifetime and perhaps once in 2 lifetimes, to say, what does this look like on the other side? And it's fascinating when you think about what all of this means and how it will literally, at a foundation level, change the way we experience work and the way employers think about workers and vice versa. We're going to see culture change. We're going to see the dynamic between employer and employee. What typically was very hierarchical, the power shift is changing. It will never be equal because the person who makes the decision about whether or not you work there is likely always the employer, but it won't be 90-10. We're going to see a 70-30 split. At its core, what we're seeing is a redefining of the worker and the employer experience, how they will interact. The value proposition is going to be totally redefined as a result of where we are right now. I'm excited about it. I'm afraid of it because all of our systems, all of our policies, our history suggests that we don't see it that way. The two normally are not fully aligned. And so it may not, that's what's going to come out of this is a redefinition of work. And then how people work, the work experience is going to be really, really redefined. An outcome of the pandemic, when everyone was forced to work from home, was this big question from employees. Oh, wow, I can now work remotely. Isn't that wonderful? And so, at least in the United States, employee groups and employees as groups are demanding that their employers consider allowing them to work remotely. At first, there was pushback because naturally organizations were used to having people come to work, a workplace, and it helped build culture and camaraderie and esprit de corps. And so there was major pushback. What we've seen, interestingly, and we're talking about over just a 4-month period, is employers have said, let me rethink that. Maybe there's value to us as an organization in allowing you to work remotely. One, and the obvious is, there's fewer operating costs. So I don't have to rent as much or lease as much office space. I don't have to provide as much coffee and snacks and security on the front desk. So employers said, let me look at this practically. This may not be such a bad idea. But where it has come and where it's going is employers are saying, that means if you can work remotely, that means I can get this same talent in another part of the planet. We're, for example, based in Washington, D.C. area. And in the past, I was limited to the labor pool. The 10 or 12 mile radius from our office. That was how I defined my labor pool. Going forward, my labor pool is the globe. It's going to create a different level of competition. If employees thought their competition was tough before, it's really going to be tough. The United States has, to make this point really clear, about 330 million people as our population. The globe has over 7 billion. The level of competition for jobs globally has really been upped as a result of COVID, because COVID has made us realize that we actually can find talent wherever we want it, whenever we want it, sort of just in time fulfillment. That's one of the things that I don't think a lot of employees thought about when they were saying, I want to work remotely. I can work from anywhere, because now the employer's saying, you're right, and that means I can get talent from anywhere. Employees are going to have to realize that in this highly super competitive world where we're going into an economic recession globally, and that employers will look around the globe to solve their workforce needs now, upskilling is now my personal responsibility. It's not just my employer's responsibility, because the reality is the employer says, if you can't do the job that I need you to do, that person in Bangalore can. It's going to be a really interesting opportunity for each individual employee to take his or her skill readiness and sort of review it and engage in some introspection and say, is there going to be a job for me in this hyper-competitive environment going forward? And if not, and it's quite possible that many of the jobs that existed before the pandemic we know won't ever come back, then I've got to use this period of time during this pandemic to reskill myself. Because after it's all said and done, when the economy comes back, I've got to go into the market and differentiate myself. My employer may not be within 15 miles of my home, but I'm only going to get that job if I can compete globally and prove that I can add value to an organization.